Hi, this is Len. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles. Today is Friday, January 15th in Sanibel, Florida, and it's been chilly here lately in the 60s. I know my friends up north aren't going to have too much sympathy for that, and also the water has been 60 degrees, so I haven't been swimming in the ocean. 60 degrees is a little bit too much like Maine water for me, and I'm hoping it might warm up, but it's still beautiful, biking, doing some things. And I have a conversation with you I hope you'll enjoy this week with Thad McIlroy and Cliff Guren. They are publishing consultants, book publishing consultants who have prepared a report. They're co-authors, and there's a third co-author I'll tell you about. The title is COVID-19 and Book Publishing. It's a pretty smart piece, 50 pages, available for a free download. It's a combination of passion for the role of books in uncertain times and clear-eyed analysis of trends, which may help see what's ahead for book publishing on the other side of the pandemic. May it arrive sooner rather than later. I'll also have you news of what I find to be kind of a baffling investigation of Amazon by the state of Connecticut and others, and a brief tech tip about how to get the flash briefing. They have changed the voice command to get the Morning Journal and other flash briefings. Let's get started. The news story I want to share with you started with an exclusive Wall Street Journal report by Jeffrey Trachtenberg, a really good reporter who covers publishing, and Dana Mattioli. It appeared in the Journal January 13th. The title was Connecticut Investigating Amazon's eBook Business. I heard about this from Paul Tribble, also from John Sullivan. The story is that the Connecticut Attorney General, William Tong, said that the state is actively investigating how Amazon sells and distributes digital books. And what's odd is that this is about Amazon's negotiations with the Big Five book publishers, and they're trying to figure out whether Amazon engaged in anti-competitive behavior through agreements with those Big Five publishers. It stems to a 2019 subpoena that was obtained by a nonprofit named Tech Antitrust Project, and it showed Connecticut asking for documents related to dealings with the Big Five. No comment from Amazon, and the AG's office said that Amazon had cooperated with the subpoena. Now, Connecticut was involved in the 2012 Justice Department lawsuit against Apple and the big publishers, not Random House, which led to penalties paid by the publishers in a settlement. Then Apple went to trial. They lost. They also paid penalties. And all of that benefited those of us who had bought ebooks during that period at inflated prices. What's odd about this is that I have always thought that it was the big publishers who were keeping ebook prices artificially high. I was surprised when Amazon, in the wake of that Justice Department action, agreed to stick with prices to let the publishers set the prices. And, you know, the prices have been up around $14. The Obama biography, I think, is close to $18. Really, in my opinion, as you'll hear in the conversation, it's the publishers that have been trying to keep the prices of ebooks up. So why is Amazon being investigated about this? I just think it's odd. And that strangeness was evident in a piece in the New York Times, January 15th, 2 days after the Wall Street Journal report. There's a column called On Tech by Shira Ovide, and she was talking about the 2012 Justice Department action and saying that the department sued Apple and the big publishers. She writes, book publishers were freaked out about Amazon's habit of pricing many popular Kindle books at $9.99, no matter what the book companies thought the price should be. Amazon was willing to lose money on ebooks, but the publishers worried that this would devalue their products. Government said that to strike back at Amazon, the book companies and Apple made a deal. That's accurate. Publishers could set their own ebook prices on Apple's digital bookstore, and they essentially could block discounts by any bookseller, including Amazon. To the government, this looked like a conspiracy to eliminate competition over prices. Yeah, even down to secret gatherings of the publishing executives in restaurants. It had all the marks of price collusion, basically. Later, she writes, Amazon, Apple, and the other ebook sellers agreed to let publishers enforce ebook prices. The arrangements were legally kosher because they were separately negotiated. They weren't colluding between each publisher and bookseller. And then she writes, I can't answer why Amazon agreed to this. Well, yeah, it's a good question. And it also makes it clear that the publishers pretty much dictated those terms. I think Amazon, obviously, they're tough negotiators. They must have got something from the publishers in that setting that made it a deal that they were willing to sign on to. But she contacted someone who's written a book about the ebook litigation, Christopher L. Sagers, and was asking how come an antitrust case meant to lower prices instead led to higher prices. He said it was a failure of antitrust laws. She has a hilarious conclusion to her column. Amazon was selling the ebook edition of Professor Sager's book about the price-fixing lawsuit for $28.45 on Friday, a price dictated by the book publisher. And his quote was, I wish it were cheaper. I wanted a lot of people to read it. Now, you'll hear Thad McIlroy and Cliff Guren and I talk about the Big Five ebook pricing in our interview. Short version, ebook pricing is still broken. For the tech tip, I want to update you on the latest way to ask your Alexa device to play the Morning Journal, which is a flash briefing I do 6 days a week. This also applies to other flash briefings. Now, when I first started out more than a year ago, it was pretty cool because once you had enabled my flash briefing, Morning Journal, then you would simply say, Alexa, what's new? And it would play the flash briefing. If you had other flash briefings like NPR and some of the standard news ones, it would play them in whatever order you had set up. In the past year, Amazon has sort of peeled off some of the news sources and content for Alexa to a separate feed, and they changed the way that you get to that feed so that now if you say what's new, it doesn't take you to the flash briefing. I think there's a way to set up kind of a news digest that's personal to you, very handy, but it doesn't include kind of privately made flash briefings like mine. For a while, you could still say, Alexa, what's up? I noticed you couldn't say what's new, and that worked for a while, and now that doesn't work. It brings you to some strange thing. The only way that I know for sure works to get the Morning Journal is to say, Alexa, what is my flash briefing? Or Alexa, play my flash briefing. And then at that point, it will bring it up the way it has in the past. I reached out to a contact that I have on the Blueprints team, that's the group that makes the flash briefing platform possible, and they do a great job responding. I asked him if there were any other commands that might be a little shorter to bring up the flash briefings, except for Alexa, what's my flash briefing? So that's the latest. And if you haven't listened to the Morning Journal, I hope you'll maybe give it a try. It's a 5-minute bit of commentary or something about what I've read. Today I was talking about Austin Kleon's book. I frequently refer to that, to Keep Going. And it led me to the idea of inviting him on the podcast next week, which I did, but I haven't heard from him yet. I'm hoping that we might be able to hear from Austin Kleon in the interview next week. Time now for the interview. I have two guests this week, which is unusual. They are Cliff Guren and Thad McIlroy, two of the three co-authors of a 50-page report released on January 5th titled COVID-19 and Book Publishing, Impacts and Insights for 2021. I've known Thad for a number of years, had him on a show a couple of times. I always enjoy hearing his thoughtful analysis of the book publishing business. He is president of the Future of Publishing, based in San Francisco and Vancouver. You'll find his information at thefutureofpublishing.com. That's also where you'll be able to download a free copy of the report, along with other information about the publishing business. Cliff Guren, the second guest today, is founder and CEO of Syntopical, which provides strategic planning and development services to publishers and other businesses. He worked for 10 years at Microsoft. Part of that was as senior director for Encarta. You probably remember that, the digital multimedia encyclopedia. And he also worked at Apple for 5 years before that. His roles there included manager of electronic publishing. The third author of the report, Steve Seek, is president of SKS Advisors in New York. He does specialized research and strategy for publishers and information providers. So, as you can tell, these three veterans of the publishing industry bring a lot of experience to the question that they posed in their report, namely, how is COVID-19 affecting the industry and its future? I connected with Thad and Cliff on Tuesday, January 12th by Skype. Thad was at his home in Vancouver and Cliff was at his in Seattle. I began by asking the consultants how they decided to collaborate on this new report. The first person you'll hear talking is Thad.
I think it goes back to last summer when I was starting to notice sort of unusual things going on. I guess the first thing was the work from home trend. And it got me thinking, okay, well, this is something so dramatically different for publishing and could have several impacts beyond the obvious one that people are at home. It could have a significant impact on time to market, on overheads. And so it got me thinking about what other kinds of external influences might be also having an impact on publishing. And so the three of us were having a conversation about that and decided to go down the several paths that we pursued in the report.
Cliff, you were in the starting of the idea then too, and what appealed to you about the project?
Well, Thad and I are frequent collaborators, if nothing else, on the phone, chatting about the industry, and have also done some other projects together. So it really grew out of ongoing conversations, and each of us on the project had a different primary domain of expertise. Mine being ebooks as well as libraries, and then I took on the entertainment section, Steve more in the education section. So it was a natural pairing of or coming together of all of the three of us, and a reflection of all of our areas of interest and expertise.
I'm interested in the writing process. Did each of you write a section and then you sort of stitched them together, or what? How did you get a 50-page report written by three people?
That we did, we each worked on separate sections, but it was a constant collaboration in terms of the content. Early drafts went out to the other two, and we went through a whole number of cycles. And one of the things that impressed me by the end was that writing in and of itself can be quite lonely. This was a great way to banish that loneliness and create a collaboration. I think the report's so much stronger than just, those three contributions. It's sort of topped up by our ability to work together to enhance each other's work.
Interesting. Well, Thad, in taking a look at COVID's effect on a specific industry, publishing industry, you could have stuck to just the usual publishing suspects or sources. And in the report, you say you wanted to go beyond that to consider the economy as a whole, as well as changes in retail in the entertainment industry. What was your thinking about sort of broadening the net that you cast to get information that you hoped would be useful?
The obvious first one was the economy at large. Publishing is quite recession-proof. Ordinarily in past recessions, I've studied that, and the economics per se tend not to have that much of a negative impact on book sales. This recession is such a different beast that's not, coming out of a primary economic shift, but out of a medical shift, which become a social shift, which has led to an economic shift. So it became, more interesting than ever to try and get an economic lens on what was taking place. And from that, I moved on to, other contexts, such as the retail context, which is another thing that we looked at in the report, the future of retail and what that means to book selling.
And then how did the entertainment piece lock in? What was the benefit of looking at that in a careful way when you were talking about the future or the effect on COVID of book publishing?
Well, first of all, let's acknowledge that COVID has been a massive accelerator. And so it's sped up trends that were already underway. And it turns out because of things like the fact that the entertainment industry has been focusing on delivery to the home and experimented with subscription models and things like that, it seemed like a natural place to look for the effects of that kind of acceleration on entertainment broadly, and a great petri dish for understanding how those same things might be applied to publishing.
That in general, to sort of start at a top line, how have book publishers fared during the pandemic? Very
well, in fact. Right? It's actually been very pleasing to see that, in the midst of a great calamity, the publishing industry has remained pretty strong. The book sales across all the subject areas are strong, some much stronger than others. Books for younger and young adults and children have fared particularly well, but even adult fiction and nonfiction is up 5% or thereabouts for this year. So publishing has done well. Book selling, not so much.
Right. You make the point that, which is kind of intuitive for anybody who has lived through this, especially someone who loves books, that this has really been a reading favorable environment, that we've been at home, we haven't been commuting, and it's been pretty natural to, I'm sure I've done more reading this year than years past. And it's an interesting question that you pose in the report as to, is this going to turn into be a long-term trend, an actual sort of changing of how much people love to read, or is it something that we're just going to go back to the way it was before? Cliff, how soon do you think we'll know, or at least have some strong indications as to whether it's a lasting effect or one that's pretty fleeting?
Well, there's been signs for some time now that Americans have been increasingly exhausted by the relentless news cycle and the general pace of life. Books on hygge, for example, the Norwegian cozy lifestyle, have been selling quite well. I got one for the holidays myself from a family member.
What is that? I'm not familiar with that. What's that about?
Well, it's basically the philosophy of Norwegian cozy living, basically, how to make your environment more comfortable, to focus on just being cozy is the best word that's out there. Huh. And that's reflected, for example, in the sale of during the pandemic of books on things like baking and crafts. In fact, the prognosticators on social trends say that cozy is going to be one of the defining themes of 2022, 2021. Yeah. But what I want to say is that it's going to be a while before we can actually understand the long-term implications. Let's make a couple of suppositions. The vaccine is rolling out over the course of this year. It's probably going to take at least till the second half of the year, maybe even the late part of the year, to really see the effects of that, which means that the return to, quote, the new normal really is probably late this year, early next year. So probably in the second half of 2022 is when we'll start to see what the new normal looks like in terms of reading. And I think there will be some of the impacts of COVID that stick. And so I think you're likely to see more reading happening in 2022 than there would have been, say, before the pandemic. So probably won't stay at pandemic levels, but probably won't go back to pre-pandemic levels.
The other part of the change that COVID has wrought, you point out, is the increase in ebooks, more demand in libraries, more sales of ebooks by publishers. September ebook sales were up 22% year over year, 16% year to date. And I can imagine, I've got an MBA, and I can imagine running a publishing company and seeing the numbers of this particular product getting much stronger. It would normally result in perhaps more emphasis there or some kind of taking it into account. But it comes up against this sense that publishers are sort of resistant to ebooks still. I, as a real ebook fan, I can see that in the pricing of ebooks, and Obama's book at over $18 essentially. Do you see the success of ebooks in this environment as helping publishers to understand this way of getting great books to readers in a more open-minded way That's a really biased way of asking the question, I'm sure, but I have to think of my audience here. You can kind of convert that to a less biased question about the effect of the pandemic on ebooks status within particularly the big five publishers.
Yeah. Cliff and I were kicking that around a bit more last night, and it should be an obvious answer to that question. Ebook sales are up. Publishers should be delighted, and you would think, so next year they'll be delighted some more, and on and on. But the publishers, particularly the big five, as you mentioned, have always had this curious relationship to ebooks, a love-hate relationship to ebooks. And, there seem to be several reasons for that. Partly it's, the need to maintain the print infrastructure, including this, manufacture and distribution of print books, which is such a big part of the largest part of their business. And they view, ebooks as some kind of a cannibalization in some cases, or undermining some of the supply chain issues. So it's a tough call as to whether or not the publishers will say, isn't this great? You'd love to think they would, but I'm not sure that it's going to change their fundamental attitude to ebooks.
Cliff, you have the same take on it?
Let me add 2 points here. One, I've always believed that ebook adoption is in large part a matter of acculturation. In other words, if people have experienced ebooks, that they will come to understand their benefits and read more ebooks. And you can point to the fall off of ebook sales many years ago and say, well, that didn't seem to be true. But there's a lot of things that have changed. A big one of which is that we all have much better cell phones in our pockets with better screens, and we're more dependent on those screens. And we have much better tablets. I mean, I read on an iPad Pro, and it's a wonderful, wonderful screen. So is it the same as looking at print? But no, but it also has many, many advantages. But the second thing I would say is that one of the things COVID has done is forced everyone to reassess the value equation. So, for example, if you look at, and this relates back to entertainment, so if you look at what some of the movie studios were doing early on, they were testing the rental of first-run movies at about $20 per. I don't think that was as successful, and it's hard to tell because it's always dependent upon the quality of the movie, but I don't think that's been as successful for them over the long term as actually changing their thinking and saying, in fact, what we need to do is use our movies not to emulate that initial window, but actually make them a driver for signing up for our new streaming services, and whether you make them free or still make them available for rent at a much lower price, whatever. And so ebooks are part of that as well. And it's going to take several years still, but eventually we're going to figure out what is the value of something that has both a physical component and then an intellectual property component, and what is people's tolerance for paying for the intellectual property at a price that reflects some value of the physical good itself, because you're trying to use those two things to support one another. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting equation, and I think COVID has given everyone new data to sort of assess that, and I think we'll see more experimentation with price going forward.
Would COVID have given big publishers a reason to test lower ebook prices just to see how the numbers would change? Or maybe that's something they know already, that there's elasticity of demand. Amazon Publishing is selling ebooks at much lower prices and, having some pretty dramatic success. Maybe they already know those microeconomics, and the pandemic doesn't really change their preference for print books for some of the reasons that you've mentioned, and obviously the relationship with bookstores. But I'm always hoping that there's going to be something that's going to result in ebook prices from the big five that just seem fair or more appropriate, or just lower.
Thad, go ahead, please.
Game is one of those issues that's kind of something you have to look underneath it to see what's really going on there. The pricing for the digital books, is something that is very much related to what Amazon is going to sell the physical book for. And, of course, they've experimented with different prices. And you see, price promotions and different, ongoing attempts by the big five to, see what the movement is at different price levels. But the other point, you're raising such a good point about Amazon publishing. And if you want to try and understand, the dynamic of ebook pricing on, popular, on best-selling new books, clearly Amazon knows what they're doing, right? Amazon's not leaving money on the table. Amazon understands exactly the dynamics for this. And what does that say? It says that the big five are leaving dollars on the table by pushing the prices up that high. Again, you have to say, but what is that secondary impact then on the print market? And that's where the truth lies.
Yeah.
There's also another related phenomenon, which is that we wrote about, is that the volume of books selling through Walmart, through Costco, et cetera, has increased significantly. And the sale of, and those have primarily been sales of bestsellers, front list bestseller titles. And we still have a lot of bookstores in lockdown. So it seems that we're not going to know what new normal looks like, including the pricing structure that works, until we see what the new normal is, how many bookstores survive, whether books continue to sell at these volumes through the warehouse stores, what role Amazon plays going forward. Certainly one lesson one would think that the publishers took from the early days of COVID is that the continued focus on Amazon as the main distribution point for physical books puts them in jeopardy if Amazon ends up changing, as they did, their focus on what they want to expedite through their warehouse at a time of crisis. And so I think it'll be very interesting to see what the new normal is come probably, as we said, 2022. We'll see. It's hard to know when the new normal really is not the end of the pandemic, but in fact a stable, ongoing business environment.
Yeah. In your report, you touch insightfully, it seemed to me, on different sectors: trade publishing, K through 12, higher education, bookstores or libraries. In thinking of just kind of the economic prospects for those areas given COVID, I had this idea of saying if you each had $1 million to invest and you could only invest in trade publishing, K through 12, higher education, bookstores or libraries, do you think a smart Bezosian investor might be able to say, boy, that's the one that really has got some momentum possibly coming out of this COVID period? Where would you put your money? Education.
I mean, there's always growth in education, and there's still tremendous shift in the product that's being offered into that market and that's being accepted by that market. There's a real openness still of opportunity for new entrepreneurial ventures to break through, both at the K-12 and at the higher ed level. In trade, we're looking at, it was a good year, and but it's up 3, down 2, up 5, over 3, that kind of thing. I don't see any significant opportunity in trade the way the industry is currently configured. Education, definitely.
How about bookstores? Jamie Downt running Barnes & Noble. Any chance to come out of this reshuffling of the deck with a Barnes & Noble that really works and can succeed, especially with somebody as smart as Jamie Downt running it?
Cliff, should I go with that for a minute?
Sure, and then I'll chime in. You bet.
Sure. I'm on the board of an independent bookstore here in Vancouver, and so I've been watching, book selling very much up close in the last year. We got off to a pretty good start at the beginning of COVID, where there was so much disruption. Sales were up year to year for the first 3 or 4 months in which COVID was a factor on the store. Since then, there was a leveling off. Now we're going into a slight decline. And that seems to, a reasonable reflection across North America. The independent booksellers, in part, as Cliff's mentioning, they're still locked down. And then the general shift to online purchasing has very much been at play for the booksellers. The issue of Barnes & Noble, is a very big one. And Don mentioned, he acknowledged that their sales would be down 20% in 2020. And that's in a chain that was already losing significant amounts of money. And so, depending on how we know how deep-pocketed the owners are. They're very deep-pocketed, but how much they want to keep spending to keep Barnes & Noble going. It's one of those sort of historically badly timed acquisitions that they could never have seen just how awful it was going to be the year after they bought this chain of 600 stores.
Wow, yeah.
Yep.
Cliff?
It unfortunately, it seems like booksellers are going to have a number of challenges going forward for the next year or two. And it's going to be, my heart goes out to them because it's going to be challenging to survive, as so many other small businesses are finding. So if you can get to the time when people are comfortable shopping in stores again, and particularly, and many bookstores are small physical environments, which makes it particularly challenging, then there's hope. But getting there, it's still a ways away, and it's a tough spot to be in. With my $1 million, the other thing that there's 2 areas that I think are still ripe for reinvention. One is still the subscription book model, and there's a lot of challenges there. But I still think that one thing that we've learned from the entertainment sector is the appeal of subscription services. But the second part of that is that subscription services that are succeeding are doing so because they refresh their content frequently. And so the other investment would be whether it would be re-envisioning user-generated content, which means to me finding ways to take many of the authors who just well-known, or not well-known, but established authors, people who have been successful in the past, but who don't really have a distribution opportunity, a discovery and distribution opportunity today, and try to create a subscription service that features their work with a focus on getting content out more quickly. Because it has certainly been a good year for publishing, but at the same time, the amount of new books that are related to current events has not picked up noticeably. That I don't have hard data, that's anecdotal, but noticeably. And one of the things we've seen is that in a crisis, you have to be able to get that information out quickly to be a relevant part of the conversation.
That's interesting. Do you see a subscription model for books helping new and current authors or backlist titles of other authors, or where do you see the opportunity there?
Well, it could be both. I think the thing is that right now, Amazon sort of has the monopoly on self-publishing, not necessarily the only game in town, but certainly they're the dominant game in town. And at the same time, I think self-publishing still has sort of negative connotations for many, I'll call it, authors who've traditionally been served by whether it's large publishers, mid-sized publishers, or well-established smaller publishers. And those are, particularly the smaller and mid-sized publishers, are increasingly challenged around the discovery issue. They're, again, one of the main beneficiaries of hand selling out of bookstores and so forth. And so if there was a way to create a new service that help discovery, and the reason why a subscription model makes sense in that environment is you don't want to have to make the buying decision every time. You simply want to trust the editorial authority of the people who are putting the quality books into the service itself, and then trying out those books. It's kind of like re-envisioning the book club for a new century. So anyway, if I had my $1 million, those are the two areas I'd play in with my $1 million. And let me know when it's coming so I can alert my.
That's right. That's right.
You didn't give us the option of actually investing outside of publishing, which is in fact what I would do with my $1 million.
Right. Let's see. Well, it's too late to invest in Zoom, but there's going to be some other big winners here. Well, Cliff,
but not too late to invest in Cozy Pants.
Cozy Pants that's the Norwegian stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Cozy clothes.
So
soft pants.
When you're living in your cozy environment, you're wearing cozy pants.
Exactly.
This is something that's new to me. I'm just going to have to do some Googling of this when we get done. Well, Cliff, let's talk a little bit more about the entertainment sector and what book publishing can take from it as it moves through this period. You've talked about the power of the subscription model. Are there other kind of trends or insights that you see alive and becoming increasingly successful in entertainment that could be ported over to books if people were aware and willing to try some new things?
Well, I think we talked about the fact that the entertainment providers who have been succeeding have been able to deliver directly into the home. They've been subscription-based. There's a focus on value with something for everyone in the multi-generational household. The two things that we haven't talked about, we talked about frequency. The two things we haven't talked about are social. And so you've seen a lot of growth in multi-generational social gaming and esports. And then also the fact that there's increasing competition, which means that there's been a lot of churn in the business. So in terms of things that publishers can learn from, on the positive side, if there's a way, particularly around ebooks, to more meaningfully integrate a social experience, that's probably a positive. But on the downside, it's just being aware that the market is getting crowded. And it also then means that there's ever increasing amounts of competition for people's time and attention and ultimately their entertainment dollar. So I think it is important for publishers to be mindful of the fact that they're living in an environment of increased competition and increased innovation, and it's worth figuring out how that applies to books.
For as long as I've been doing this podcast, the idea of a social aspect of reading has seemed tantalizingly important, and it never really seems to take hold yet. I thought Goodreads was going to do that Goodreads is part of Amazon, and Otis Chandler being a pretty innovative guy. And I love Goodreads. I love what they're doing, but I find that I've got so much I want to read. I don't really need 10 other ideas for my next favorite book from my friends. And so the social possibilities for me as a book lover, I've just never seen anything. Probably the thing that interested me most is I was experimenting for a while that I could have a few friends where I could see their highlights in a book I was reading. Right. And I would come across and say, Thad liked this section. I thought, well, now that's pretty cool. But it takes a lot of logistical planning. All right, we're all going to read this book and we're all going to sign up so our highlights can be seen. But why hasn't more of that happened, 12 years after the Kindle was introduced?
The social aspect of reading has always been, to me, a little bit peculiar. Reading is, for me, a solitary activity. And while it's fun to describe or share your enthusiasm for a book after the fact, or sometimes your panning of the book after the fact, I don't really want to be chatting with you, Len, while I'm reading it. No.
What you're talking about, shared annotations, has been experimented with for a number of years. And in fact, Amazon actually figured out a way to do that, which is to aggregate shared annotations into what they call popular highlights, I believe is the term they use for it. And I find those interesting and useful. But let's not constrain ourselves to immersive reading in fiction or nonfiction, immersive nonfiction, because there's lots of other kinds of content. So, for example, we got, for the holidays, everyone in our small family got a particular cookbook and then everyone got together on Zoom and tried some recipes and had a ball. Now, why can't that somehow be facilitated by a publisher? And we did it all over Zoom, but it could be that there's innovative ways to do that. For example, some of the streaming services have introduced a feature where you can watch movies together. So it's synced up, you're watching at the same time. You can be sharing chat and notes while you're doing it. So I think the point is there's things to play with. Do I know the exact answer of what the right way to integrate social into books is? No. Do I think that we are social animals and want to have some kind of social capability built into our online activities in general? Yes. And so there's still someone who's going to figure that out for books.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with you, Thad, that it's a private pleasure for me. And in some ways, because everything is social, that part of reading is becoming more precious to me than less. So it's like the bar for some clever idea in social seems to be getting higher as I retreat more into the sanctuary of, me and my book curled up in a nice chair. But interesting.
But the only thing there I would encourage is to make a distinction between your immersive reading and your active reading, because they really are different beasts.
What do you mean by that?
Well, immersive reading is the idea of getting lost in the book. Okay. Right? And that's typically our experience when we read fiction and certain kinds of nonfiction. Active reading, you're reading basically as a means to an end. Uh-huh. You're trying to do something. You may be actively reading because it's a textbook. You may be actively reading because it's a cookbook. You may be actively reading because you want to learn a new skill. So think about, for example, a book on motorcycle maintenance. Uh-huh. It might be that book has active features that say, oh, you're reading about how to and I'm not a motorcycle guy, but you're reading about how to change the carburetor or whatever. Mm-hmm. And you can participate in a chat group in the book that says, oh, I tried that, but he's got that wrong, and in that or those steps are mixed up, or try this wrench or whatever. I'm obviously making up as I go, but the point is, because our reading is so broad, there's so many different kinds of reading that we do, that we just need to unlock our imagination and try and figure out how is it that we can combine text, video, and social in interesting new ways, beyond just the immersive reading that we all associate with that getting lost in a book, which everyone wants to preserve. That's the joy of it. But that's just one part of reading. Yeah,
that's a really useful distinction to make. Well, let's finish up libraries. Some of what you said about libraries that just really resonated with me, that these are public spaces, you've got physical objects, and a lot of the sort of nervousness about this new world we're entering, I could see it would be a challenge for libraries. Maybe there's some other advantages libraries have going forward, but what would you say on the topic of libraries?
Cliff, why don't you take this one? You're very passionate on this topic.
All right, well, thank you. So I actually spent a year and a half helping launch the Panorama Project, which is the industry-wide project focused on understanding the impact of public libraries on book discovery and book sales. And the project is still ongoing and doing some important research. Having said that, my sense of what the challenges that libraries face are really twofold, and they're closely related. It's focus and funding. So right now we're asking, libraries are basically, for example, in our area, the library buildings are generally not open, but you can walk outside and pick up books, etc. At the same time, in the city of Seattle, it's clear from the impact of COVID that city budgets are going to be cut because tax revenues are way down and state revenues are going to be cut. And libraries get most of their funding from local and state governments. So the federal government may come along and provide some additional relief, but how much and whether it will actually fill the gaps to be determined. So going forward, how much funding do libraries get? Most of them will probably at least see over the short term some budget cuts. And then what are they going to be asked to pick up in the local community with that budget? So we know there's going to be a lot of gaps in additional things like job training and other relevant community services and even literacy and things because, for example, think about how many kids are just falling behind in school, and libraries traditionally do work in those areas. So what will libraries be asked to do? How much money will they have to do it? And at the end of the day, how much of their budgets will end up going to reading materials, whether it's books, ebooks, etc., versus other critical services. So libraries are obviously an incredibly valuable resource because of the people, because of their focus on information, because, frankly, of the fact that they have a physical presence. But how all those things will come together in the post-pandemic world, I think, is unclear and certainly going to be different than it has been in the past. Anything else
you'd each like to say to wrap up something about the report that we didn't? I'll make links to it and point out that it's available for free download. But anything else about sort of your hopes for getting it out and any interesting reactions you had in the first week since you released it? What would be some final words from each of you?
The one that we've had a great response on the report, which has been gratifying. You never know when you send it out there how it's going to land, but we've heard excellent, strong, positive feedback from all quarters. So that's been really gratifying. The one thing that I thought was kind of fun at the end of the report was the topic trends in books, trying to postulate what are some of the bestsellers that we're going to see in this year and next. And things such as managing remote workplaces. Suddenly now that's going to be a category. 100 new books on that topic this year, several of which are going to be big bestsellers. And likewise on the other side, as an employee, how do you maximize your contribution as a remote worker? Because it's a whole new dynamic in terms of what's expected and what it takes to thrive there. And obvious things, like we talked about with baking, will remain a big topic. The one thing I just realized last night that I hadn't put on the list is books about COVID. There's already 6 or 7 that I've tracked down that have been real books. I mean, there's always garbage on Amazon that tries to take advantage of anything topical. But there's some, already some serious books being published on that topic. So there's some, apart from everything else, there's some interesting opportunities for publishers around some new interest areas occasioned by this otherwise dreadful development.
Cliff?
As Thad said, we've been very, very gratified by the response to the report. And I think it speaks to the fact that books remain an important part of our lives. That's only been in many ways reinforced, but it's both because of what books represent in our culture, but also because of the stories that are in them, the ability to connect with other people, the information. And so none of those things are going away. I think this has been, as I said at the outset, COVID has been an accelerator. I'm sure it's accelerating trends in book publishing that we just haven't even seen yet because we're just not looking there or they aren't quite visible. So what we've done, which we're so happy about, is, and thanks to people like you, is help kindle a conversation, which is what we really intended. We wanted this report to help spark conversation, help inform decision-making, give people new perspectives, and to the extent that we've been able to do that, it's great, and we're very grateful for your time today and giving us the opportunity to talk about this. I'm sure you can tell from our responses, we're passionate, we're opinionated, but it's all because we love books.
Well, yeah, I recommend it. I will when I put this together. I think it's well written. There's some life in the writing of it. There's some passion evident, as well as it's very organized. So it's it might not leap off the shelves for some people. A book about COVID and publishing, stop the presses. But you managed to convey the importance of the topic and also some intelligent thinking about it in a way that it doesn't surprise me. You're getting a good reaction to it, and I'm glad to spread the word.
Well, we priced it right, Len. 0.
Exactly. Nice work on that part. I have been speaking with Cliff Guren and Thad McIlroy, two of the co-authors with Steve Seek of a new report titled COVID-19 and Book Publishing. It's available for free download at thefutureofpublishing.com. Thanks very much to you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was glad to hear that the publishing industry is doing well despite the pandemic crisis, and I was encouraged to hear Thad and Cliff's optimism for what's ahead with some good ideas I think are worth considering. I found it intriguing to have a chance to look into a specific industry through the lens of COVID's impact on society, and I hope you found our conversation valuable. Be sure to check out the show notes for the link to the free download for the report if you'd like to read it, or you can find it directly by going to thefutureofpublishing.com. I don't know for sure who my guest will be next week. As I said, I've invited Austin Kleon. We'll see. A week or so after that, I'll be talking to someone from the Kindle team about some of the new software updates that have dropped in the last few weeks. It might be time to sit down with Darlene, too. We've been here coming up on 2 months in Sanibel. We recorded something, I think, the first night we got here, and it might be fun to share our observations about our stay so far. Appreciate you dropping by to listen, and hope your new year is off to a good start. Take care. Bye.